Hey everybody, this is Deb with Truthification Chronicles, and this document right here, just packed full of stuff, yummy goody stuff that I'm so happy to share with you because finally Mike Flynn has a lawyer who is really going to go out and fight for him. I'm so happy, but I think part of it was a whole timing thing, okay? And I'm sure those of you who follow the 17th letter of the alphabet understand that there was a need for him to put up with this for a little while he was working with the government. And like his plea said, participating in covert law enforcement activities. So that had to happen. And now we're at the point where he is gonna start fighting back, and he picked a great lawyer, Sidney Powell. Now, I'm not going to take the time to go through these two articles, but I'm going to leave the link down below. They're both from the Federalist, and I think they're really good articles to read. This one is 5 Ways Michael Flynn's New Lawyer Could Expose More About Spygate. And some of what Sidney Powell is trying to do, and we're going to see in this document, is going to put out more truth about Spygate. And I think it's really great. So this was a tweet. President Trump, mentioned her and called her a great lawyer. Now, she had already written a book about the whole Mueller thing. She was not a fan of the Mueller investigation. So that's, very good for Michael Flynn. And then there's this article, too, that is also from the Federalist. And this was, both of these, I think, were back in June. And so this is when it first came out. And this is a little bit more about her and why she is such a good pick. So I'll leave those down below. You can read them on your own. But we're going to focus on this right now because this is a motion to compel production of Brady material and for an order to show cause. So this is a really good document. And I'm not that big on lawyer speak and everything, but this is actually a pretty easy to read document. It's 19 pages long. Well, technically, the actual, motion here that she writes up is only 17. So I just had to point that out. Because at the end, it's just, the formality stuff. So, yeah, the actual motion is only 17 pages long. So anyway, I'm going to read the first part of this to you because I think there's some important stuff in here, and then I'm going to skip through some of it and show you, some of the things that I think you might want to hear about it. So, Michael T. Flynn files this brief in support of his motion to compel production of Brady material and for an order to show cause. The motion was filed under seal because of references to information covered by the protective order. So this is technically not the actual motion, and it doesn't list the items that they want produced because that has to be done under seal. They were forced to do it under seals because of this protective order. And I'm not real sure why, but that's it. And Sidney Powell has been seeking a security clearance so she can read these classified documents because a lot of what it has to do with is classified documents, which makes sense because Mike Flynn was the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency for a couple years. So, of course, documents about him should be classified. There's a lot about him that's been classified. Well, with good reason. So, anyway, however, Mr. Flynn will seasonably move to have it unsealed in the interest of justice and the public confidence in our judicial system. So, gotta wonder what's in there that's all sealed up that they don't want us to see. Introduction. The government has a crushing 95% or higher conviction rate. It is virtually impossible to defend successfully when the might and power of the federal government focuses on the destruction of an individual and the government holds all the cards. The rule of Brady v. Maryland, requiring the government to disclose evidence favorable to the defense, is probably the single most important underpinning of due process for a criminal defendant. Yet it is often observed only in the breach. And there's the actual case, so you can look it up if you want to. While prosecutors routinely recite their full knowledge of and compliance with their Brady obligations, in truth they often scoff at them and continue to play games to win convictions at all costs. Meanwhile, the defense does not know what the defense does not know. So you can't, ask for things if you don't know they exist. And if the prosecution is hiding it from you, then you don't know to ask for that because the prosecution's hiding it. And that's the whole point behind the Brady, so they couldn't do that. The government prosecutors are not allowed to keep those types of things hidden from the defense. I mean, the defense should have access to them. So this problem was demonstrated dramatically in the prosecution of United States Senator Ted Stevens. Now, if you've been following my videos, you already know who Ted Stevens was and the situation that happened to him. Really sad. Oh, very sad. And you can watch that video. It was one of the Louis Gohmert videos. So, yeah, the very important case, because you're going to see this, how this fits in with this whole thing now. So, in fact, it was the prosecutorial misconduct in that case that led this court to adopt the Brady order and now routinely enters in every criminal case. Okay, so that was part of it. That was kind of like the heart of how this Brady order came about. And you can see down here, there's, information about that. Some of these footnotes I'm going to point out because some of them are really important to read. Others just refer to cases like that one, not that big a deal. Unfortunately, the government learned nothing from the rebukes in Stevens. It has engaged in even more malevolent conduct in the prosecution of Mr. Flynn. Oh, don't we know that? The very reason this court adopted its Brady order was to impress upon prosecutors their most solemn obligations and to enable the contempt process to address the government's failure to comply, rather than leaving openings for any excuses or being hamstrung to consider criminal contempt charges, as it was in Stevens, by the absence of a pre-existing order. And I'm going to read this one to you because I think this is important. The investigation and prosecution of U.S. Senator Ted Stevens were permeated by the systematic concealment of significant exculpatory evidence. Remember, exculpatory means, proving that somebody's not guilty, which would have independently corroborated Senator Stevens' defense and his testimony, and seriously damaged the testimony and credibility of the government's key witness. Months after the trial, when a new team of prosecutors discovered, in short order, some of the exculpatory information that had been withheld, the Department of Justice moved to set aside the verdict and to dismiss the indictment with prejudice. When they say with prejudice, for those who don't know, that means it cannot be brought up again. Okay, I know to me that seems like backwards, but the with prejudice just means that they cannot be charged with that ever again. Okay, it's a done deal. It's dead. It's gone. It's done, which was the case with Stevens. He did nothing wrong. So he should have been just exonerated totally. But of course, that's not the way Mueller's FBI worked. And that's when it all happened. Anyway, listen to this. New prosecutors were assigned after U.S. District Judge Emmett G. Sullivan held two of the previous prosecutors in contempt for failing to comply with the court's order to disclose information to Senator Stevens' attorneys and to the court regarding allegations of prosecutorial misconduct, which were made after trial by an FBI agent who had worked on the case. And that FBI agent's name was Joy. So, yeah, this is what happened. Now, for those who didn't see that other video, but I still recommend you go back and see it. But Stevens was a senator. He was up for re-election. And it just so happened that he had a lot of dealings up in Alaska and he had a home up there. Well, he hired a contractor to work on the home. And for some weird reason, well, I say that, but I think we all know why it happened. They wanted to get him out so they could get more Democrats in there. So this was how they removed this particular senator. They brought up all these charges right before the election, and they found him guilty of working with these contractors and getting kickbacks and all this kind of stuff, which is not at all true. Okay, none of it was true, but the reason it looked like he was guilty was because the prosecutors kept all this exculpatory evidence back and nobody got to see it. So the guy was found guilty. And of course, he lost the election, but he actually didn't lose by very much, really. And he was, at that time, he was the longest sitting GOP senator that was there in the Senate at the time. Okay, now we have Orrin Hatch. But before Orrin Hatch, here was this guy, and he had been there the longest time. They wanted to get rid of him. This is how they did it. And shortly after this, he was exonerated, of course, because the exculpatory evidence came out. They were charged with prosecutorial misconduct. I mean, it was a big hullabaloo. And that's what this Brady order came out of. It came out of that. And you see who the judge was. Emmett G. Sullivan. This is who has been doing the sentencing trials, hearings for Mike Flynn. And he's the one, well, first of all, the guy wasn't real nice to him in one instance where he called him a traitor and said he'd betrayed his country. But then he came back and right away and he, kind of apologized for that and walked back, that particular statement. And then, he started really joining up with the Flynn side. And he tried to get Flynn to withdraw his plea, and Flynn wouldn't do it. And I think the reason for that is because of timing. Flynn wasn't done with what he needed to do yet. And he still had a lot more of those covert law enforcement activities to do. And then he tried to, get him to do things that would reduce the plea and ask questions. And so the judge actually has been kind of helping things out because he realized that the prosecution was withholding a lot of evidence. And so the judge ordered that they give this exculpatory evidence to the defendant, to Mike Flynn's lawyers. And they haven't done it yet. That's the problem. They're supposed to be giving a whole big bunch of stuff to this Sidney Powell. She hasn't gotten it yet. And she knows it's going to take her a long time to get to this and everything. But yeah, she needs to do that. So anyway, that's the situation there with the whole Stevens thing. Indeed, this court became a model for courts across the country when it adopted its Brady order. While the defense does not yet request consideration of criminal contempt charges, okay, so far she's not asking for that, the suppression of Brady evidence by the government here is ripe for a finding of contempt of this court's standing order, which mandated production of information favorable to the defense regardless of Mr. Flynn's plea of guilty from the time the case was transferred to its docket. So see, Emmett Sullivan has been the one who has been doing this. This is his stance. He's the one that questioned the prosecutors for Stevens, and that brought about the Brady order. And the Brady order now is what she's using right here to get more evidence that Flynn is not guilty. Okay? So it's like it all fits together. Oh, when I found out that Emmett Sullivan was in charge of all this, and he was the one that did the Stevens thing before, it was like, oh, mind blown. It really is like we're watching, something that's already been scripted, because you couldn't plan it better than this. There are no coincidences, right? The prosecutors in this case have repeatedly failed to produce Brady evidence despite, one, the clarity of this court's order, which, he very clearly said they were supposed to do that. 2, their ethical and constitutional obligations. 3, specific requests for documents the prosecutors know are exculpatory. And 4, those requests being made multiple times. Not only have the prosecutors thumbed their noses at the court's order, they have ignored the rules of ethical conduct for the D.C. bar. And I'm not going to go through all the cases that she states here, but, they got to do that. Stating that the prosecutor also is bound by the ethics of his office to inform the appropriate authority of after acquired or other information that casts doubt upon the correctness of the conviction. And like I said, she goes through Some of these are really good to read, the statements. This one just kind of gives you a summary of what I already talked about, having to do with, prosecutors are not supposed to withhold exculpatory evidence, and they've got to give it to the defense. That is part of the Brady order. The prosecutors here at the time, including Mr. Van Grack, Ms. Zainab Ahmad, and members of the special counsel team under the direction and supervision of Mr. Andrew Wiseman. And by the way, Sidney Powell knows Andrew Wiseman. She knows what he does. She's on to his tactics. So, yeah, she's going to be prepared. Engaged in conduct even more pernicious than failing to comply with their legal and ethical obligations under Brady and the D.C. Rules of Professional Conduct. They affirmatively suppressed evidence, hiding Brady material that destroyed the credibility of their primary witness, impugned the entire case against Mr. Flynn, while at the same time putting excruciating pressure on him to enter his guilty plea and manipulating or controlling the press to their advantage to extort that plea. They continued to hide that exculpatory information for months in direct contravention of this court's order, and they continue to suppress exculpatory information to this day. It is equally concerning that Mr. Wiseman and Ms. Ahmad, while at DOJ in 2016-2017, were working with Bruce Orr, then the fourth highest ranking member of DOJ, to feed information from his wife Nellie at Fusion GPS and British citizen Christopher Steele to the FBI through his secret back channel. This was happening after the FBI terminated Mr. Steele as a paid informant because he was keeping the press informed of his findings. Fusion GPS, Steele, and Ms. Orr were all working for the Clinton campaign. In addition, Ms. Orr worked for the CIA. The entire operation is further compromised by the fact that the second agent who interviewed Mr. Flynn, along with former agent Strzok, and that would be Piętka, by the way, which I've done a few videos on Piętka too, was Bruce Orr's contact with the FBI and conducted numerous debriefings of Mr. Orr, passing along to the FBI the corrupted and false information from the Orrs, Steele, and Fusion GPS. That agent may also have joined special counsel's team. Now that I didn't know, okay? So according to this, she says that Piętka may have joined special counsel's team. Okay, I looked to see if I could find that or confirm it, but it seems that there were like several FBI agents that worked with Mueller's team. I think 40, maybe more. I can't remember right off, but that's what number sticks in my brain. And so he could have been one of those. Most of them are not named. I found the names of maybe 4 or 5 of them, but other than Strzok and Page, and then, Weissman and those guys, we don't specifically know who the FBI agents were that were working with them. So was Piętka one of them? I don't know. Piętka was the guy that went with Strzok to go interview Mike Flynn. And when they did the original 302, they said Flynn had not lied. And so then they turn around and 6 months later, they write another 302. Well, Peter Strzok did. And said, yep, he did lie. So, yeah. Anyway, it's just interesting. If he was on that team, that would just be another strike against Mueller's team, which we're not surprised at this point, right? Wiseman and Ahmad were not in the DOJ chain of command to be informed by Mr. Orr at all. They had no legitimate reason to be privy to his operation with Fusion GPS and Christopher Steele. Remarkably, despite this involvement, Mr. Wiseman and Ms. Ahmed then went directly to the special counsel team along with Strzok and possibly the second agent, thereby calling into question the entire investigation with their illicit involvement with Orr and Steele. Closing the circle, Ahmad was co-counsel with Van Grack in the prosecution of Mr. Flynn. It is imperative the defense obtain the Bruce Orr 302s and notes unredacted and all evidence of this circuitous and illicit operation. Now remember, I showed you Bruce Orr 302s, but there were a lot of redactions, and she's asking for them unredacted. Now whether we'll get to see those or not, I don't know. A lot of the stuff that she's talking about here, I don't know if we'll actually get to see it, or if it will only be something that they'll be able to see, like when she's talking about unredacted. So I'm not sure how that's going to work, but I'm all for her seeing them because this woman is going to build a super case here. I mean, she's on the ball. When the prosecutors did produce any information that was exculpatory to the defense, they denied it was such, making it clear to any reasonable attorney that they were unwilling or unable to recognize and identify Brady information at all. This leaves the public, criminal defendants, and courts with no trust whatsoever in the willingness or ability of the government even to identify Brady material, much less produce it. So they keep saying, oh, well, that's not, exculpatory. Well, yeah. It's kind of along the lines of Hillary Clinton saying, well, these emails you didn't need to see because they weren't something I need to turn over to the government. Yeah, let us make that decision, okay? She had reasons for making sure things didn't come to light. So the idea that, she'd be a good judge of it, nope. And the same thing happened here, These people wanted to put Flynn away. They wanted to silence him. And so they had political reasons for what they were doing. It didn't really matter if there was evidence that proved he was innocent. It didn't matter. They just wanted to take him out. And they did this. I mean, he was the first person they took out after. I believe, if I remember correctly, wasn't that meeting where Strzok and Pientka went to talk to Flynn? It was like January 24th or something like that. And if I remember correctly, wasn't POTUS inaugurated on the 21st? So it was like 3 days later. I mean, they went after him early in the game because they were scared of him. Well, I think the things he's been doing, those covert law enforcement activities, yeah, that's what it says in his plea deal. And I did a video on that, so you can go see that. For example, just 2 weeks ago, Mr. Van Grack, Ms. Curtis, and Ms. Ballantyne produced 330 pages of documents with an abject denial the production included any Brady material. They turn over 330 pages of documents and they go, oh, but this doesn't have any Brady material in it. Yet that production reveals significant Brady evidence that we include and discuss in our accompanying motion, filed under seal because the prosecutors produced it under the protective order. So, yeah, they can't read that, but anyway. Any reasonable attorney familiar with the allegations against Mr. Flynn would recognize that this evidence contradicts and undermines the prosecutor's theories of any wrongdoing. The production of August 16, 2019 also proves that the government has long had this information in its possession, all while the government has made an exhaustive effort to prosecute Mr. Flynn for 3 years or more. Indeed, the prosecutors spent countless hours interrogating Mr. Flynn on multiple subjects and cases, yet they chose not to disclose this until now. She's nailing them, I'm telling you. I can't remember that one. Yeah, one would think that anyone investigating a person who had served our country for 33 years would first obtain his full government file, which, as to Mr. Flynn, who had worked for James Clapper and then headed the DIA, should and would likely include everything the DIA possessed. Yep, one would think so, wouldn't one? So, yeah, this conduct demonstrates contempt for the most solemn obligations of these prosecutors and for this court's long-standing order. Nothing will force the government to take its obligations seriously until individual prosecutors are held to account with findings of contempt and dismissals of prosecutions. And then she goes into this. The government's disregard for its Brady obligations is long-standing. So this is very interesting where she starts pointing out that this is not the first time. The government has long demonstrated a strong predisposition to view essentially everything as inculpatory. Well, now, exculpatory, remember, means showing the person is not guilty. Inculpatory shows the person is guilty. Okay, it's the opposite. If something appears on its face to be favorable to the defense, such as Senator Ted Stevens' note that he wanted to pay his bill to his contractor, the government will claim it was said with a wink and a nod, and therefore it showed the defendant's guilt after all. Does this sound like how the Democrats are working right now? or just the deep state. You know, we get this Mueller report and it says Trump is, pretty much exonerated. It says there was no collusion. And then they turn around and they try to make it something else. It's like, that's not what it said. But that's what they're trying to say here, that Ted Stevens had this note. He wanted to pay his bill to his contractor. They're trying to say that he didn't have to pay because he was given the contractor special perks. And, so that's why they're trying to say that. This heads we win, tails we win perspective infected and corrupted the prosecution of United States Senator Ted Stevens, 4 Merrill Lynch executives, and untold others across the country. And there's the stuff to back that up. So it is well documented that systematic, intentional misconduct has been pervasive in the Department of Justice. And there is even a report on the investigation and prosecution of U.S. Senator Ted Stevens. By the way, for those who haven't seen the other video, Ted Stevens was, like I said, he didn't get reelected, and that had been his whole life. I mean, that's really what he had been doing. Then he was mysteriously killed in a plane crash. Yeah, in Alaska. So, anyway, just kind of funny. It was not too long after that. But the government learned nothing from the excoriating action this court took in Stevens. In the related cases of Cott and Coring, shortly thereafter, the prosecutors tried again to avoid any consequences for their egregious misconduct, claiming the same violations they committed in Stevens were not material to those defendants. The Ninth Circuit vehemently disagreed. Judge Betty Fletcher wrote a blistering concurring decision. She called out the government's reckless disregard for the rights of the defendants and would have dismissed the indictment because the prosecutor's unrepentant attitude indicates that no lesser remedial action will be effective. And so Judge Fletcher wrote that only the extreme remedy of dismissal would impress upon the government the reprehensible nature of its acts and omissions. So the Ninth Circuit has not always been bad. It seems like at that time, they were still standing up for what's really justice. I don't know when they turned, but probably during the Obama administration. That'd be my guess, right? Because he was really trying to pack those courts. Yet, the government's conduct has only worsened. Its abuse of power has spread and deepened. The recent reports of the Inspector General demonstrate that constitutional, ethical, and legal violations infected the FBI, the Department of Justice, and perhaps other agencies. Even if the government deems the evidence it is withholding to be inculpatory, it is imperative that new counsel for Mr. Flynn be able to see the allegedly inculpatory information, to evaluate the government's allegations against him, and to determine how to proceed. Now, I didn't read the first one because it's just, statement there. But this number 9, Mr. Flynn may also have other defenses that prior counsel did not explore. Although it is obvious that the government's discretion to pursue a prosecution is broad, it is not without constraint. And so she's pointing out the probability that there are other things that could come out of this and that she really needs all that information. We'll go through the rest of that later. But anyway, in addition, there are egregious Fourth Amendment violations at issue in this case. Either Mr. Flynn was, 1, the subject of a pretextual counterintelligence investigation apparently resulting from an FBI-CIA operation routed and funded through the Office of Net Assessment in the Department of Defense, using Stefan Halper to smear him as an agent of Russia. 2, part of the documented abuses of the NSA database. Now, these are all an or thing here. Or 3, the subject of a criminal leak of classified information regarding his conversations with Ambassador Kislyak. 4, illegally unmasked. Or 5, some combination of the above. So those are the options. And in there, we're seeing some very strong Fourth Amendment violations. Judge Rosemary Collyer, Chief Judge of the FISA Court, has already found serious Fourth Amendment violations by the FBI in areas that likely also involve their actions against Mr. Flynn. And that's that big, long 99-page document that I've shared before. Much of the NSA's activity is in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. Not only did the last administration, especially from late 2015 to 2016, dramatically increase its use and abuse of about queries in the NSA database, which Judge Collier has noted was a very serious Fourth Amendment issue, and I did a video on that. It was part about the NSA queries, Admiral Rogers, and Dan Bongino. So it was kind of a double video there, but it all fit together. And that document that I'm talking about with Judge Collier will be listed in the description below in that particular video. So it also expanded the distribution of the illegally obtained information among federal agencies. And that was when Loretta Lynch signed off so they could use the NSA stuff with 16 other agencies. Yeah, the NSA was permitted to share raw intelligence with 16 other agencies. And that was huge, okay? Major, major, major. And it was right before Obama left. Yeah, here it says January 12th of 2017. So yeah, it was right there at the end that they did that, and they did it for a specific reason. So more people could have access to it, and it'd be harder for the people the ones who really want justice to trace it back. Judge Collier determined that former FBI Director Comey gave illegal unsupervised access to raw NSA data to multiple private contractors. The court also noticed that the improper access granted the redacted contractors was apparently in place, redacted, and seems to have been the result of deliberate decision-making, including by lawyers. So, yeah, massive, massive stuff there. So, anyway, I'm going to just basically summarize the rest of this because the rest of it is kind of based on what we've already covered. That there was this wanton disregard for the Brady order, and that they're hiding stuff that will prove that Flynn is innocent. But no, they don't want to do that because they want him to be guilty. So just very important that you remember that the judge who is handling the whole Mike Flynn sentencing thing is Emmett G. Sullivan. And I really think that he's going to require them to have this information, to get it out there, because as it says here, he was the one who, in 2009 is when this happened. He was the one that got them on contempt for failing to comply with the court's order to provide certain information to Senator Stevens' attorneys and to the court regarding a complaint filed by FBI agent Chad Joy. That was the whistleblower, Chad Joy, in December 2008, which raised serious allegations of prosecutorial and governmental misconduct in the investigation and trial of Senator Stevens. So, yeah, that's what we're talking about. And when you go through this, the whole thing is just talking about how there should be something done to hold these people accountable for what they have done, because the court's order could not be more clear. It specifically required the government to produce to defendant in a timely manner any evidence in its possession that is favorable to the defendant and material either to defendant's guilt or punishment. This government responsibility includes producing during plea negotiations the same evidence. Likewise, it is clear that the government has refused to comply with that order, despite requests by the defense that it do so. And so that's the whole thing that they're talking about here. That's, she says it several times in several different ways and gives a lot of good backup information about it. So the government has not complied with its Brady obligations, and they need to do it. And I think, in my opinion, and I heard her say this actually, which I'll probably put the clip in at the end here, that she does not expect to have him withdraw his plea. She expects him to completely be exonerated. It's going to be totally wiped clean. And I'm looking because there was something down here that I wanted to share, that there's a conclusion. So give me a second here. Sorry. Oh, yes, I should have known. Page 17. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and no court can do justice until it knows the truth. To restore any measure of trust and credibility in our law enforcement institutions, the government must be held to the highest standards. Concerns for the honor of the government, public confidence in the fair administration of justice, and the effective administration of justice in a federal scheme of government demand it. For these reasons, Mr. Flynn requests that this court, 1, issue an order to show cause why the government should not be held in contempt because of their violation of this court's standing order and their legal and ethical duties to produce exculpatory and impeachment evidence to the defense. 2, thereafter find the prosecutors in contempt of this court's Brady order. 3, issue an order to them and to the Department of Justice to preserve all evidence, emails, notes, documents, texts, cell phones, including those of the special counsel team. Ah, won't that be good? Yeah, because, see, the special counsel team was a big part of it. They're the ones that pretty much railroaded Mike Flynn. So, yep, that was it. And then 4, order the Department of Justice to produce all evidence the defense requests in our accompanying motion and any and all other Brady information in the government's possession, which again, we don't know exactly what items she's asked for because that's under seal. But they're going to try to unseal it. Okay, and so there it is. And like I said, it just keeps going, and this is just the signatures and all that kind of stuff down at the bottom. So it is 17 pages long. But that's it for this. And, I really think that she is looking to get him completely, to get the slate wiped clean with him. Because, frankly, how they got the first information, the transcripts, was, in my opinion, a Fourth Amendment violation. So it was illegally obtained in the first place. And when you have it that way, it doesn't really matter if he lied about something or not after that, because they got it all illegally. And when they got the transcript illegally, the rest of it, not going to fly. It is just not going to fly. So I think they had to wait until the Mueller thing was over with, because now there are new prosecutors, actually. And so, because the prosecutors that were there before were the Mueller team people, and they're all dispersed and they've gone back to their practices and stuff. So now, things have changed, and I'm happy to see it. I think we were ready for this, and I keep remembering the phrase, how do you get things out there in the public? You enter them as evidence. So I'm kind of wondering if some of this evidence is going to come out for our sake so that we can see more of what really happened. I also kind of wonder if the reason Flynn is still continuing to work with the government means that he's working with Durham. That's what I'm kind of thinking right now, that he's participating in that. So anyway, I'll stick the clip at the end here that has Sidney Powell saying that. And that's what I've got for you on this one. I want to thank you for stopping by, and I'll see y'all later.
Are you considering withdrawing the guilty plea?
That is not what I want to see happen here. I'm expecting, frankly, that we find evidence that warrants dismissal of the case for egregious government misconduct. But like I said, I want to know the truth. That's what I want to know first, and I can't even evaluate the validity of the plea until I have all the evidence.
In other words, you want to lay out all of the evidence, and then the judge on his own saying, prosecutors on the special counsel team, you were unconscionable, you were unprincipled, you violated the Brady rules, and because of your egregious misconduct, I'm dismissing the case against Flynn. Would that be the optimal result?
That would be the optimal result. The man, I believe, from everything I've seen now, should be completely exonerated.